because this generation of Catholics is responsible for this generation of people. It's always been so. And so we're fighting all the time, and the antibodies that are generated within the bloodstream of the church are the saints. The saints are the ones, and so when you read the lie, I think the saints would be very astonished. I think they are astonished. I think they're looking down and saying, "What's wrong with you people? Wake up! Why do you think, oh, things are so hard and all this, and we lived in some golden age? Are you crazy? We were tired. Our hands were tired. Our feet were tired. We thought everything was on the verge of total collapse, and yet we were faithful, and so God was faithful too, and He took us through." And so I think in every age this happens, and it's happening in our age.
Welcome to Into the Truth, a podcast from the Catholic Truth Society. My name is Pier Paolo Finaldi, the CEO of the Catholic Truth Society and your host for today. I'm really honoured and very happy to welcome Monsignor James Shea to speak with us today. Monsignor Shea studied philosophy at CUA and in Rome and is a priest of the Diocese of Bismarck, North Dakota. You're also president of the University of Mary and author of a kind of unexpected runaway success. Which we'll be speaking about. So welcome, Father.
I'm so happy to be here with you. Thank you.
Thank you. So tell me something about your own background, because I think in a sense the time that you describe in these books, which we'll go on to kind of speak about in a bit more depth, you kind of lived through it yourself in North Dakota, which, you know, for us I think has I think we think of cowboy films and all that kind of thing, but you're there out on the plains of America. What was it like growing up there? Did you grow up in a Catholic family?
Yeah, it was home on the range.
Okay, right.
You know, it was. So I'm the oldest of 8 children. I grew up on a dairy and small grains farm 2 miles north of a small town called Hazleton, North Dakota, not far from where the Missouri River flows. And my dad came from a large Irish Catholic family. He has some German blood as well. My mom is a convert to Catholicism. She grew up one of the only Lutheran families in a town almost solidly Catholic, because there's a Benedictine abbey there, Richardton, right, North Dakota. And they had met, got married, mom converted, and then they had 8 children on that farm, 7 boys all in a row, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then the youngest is a girl, Maria. And so I grew up in a big Catholic family. And it's true that, you know, when we described Christendom in the book, that was very much the reality. I grew up in the last gasp of Christendom. It was a tight-knit community. There was a solid Christian ethos in the air. I said both in the talk that I gave up at Leeds Trinity University and here to the clergy that, you know, my parents and my teachers at a state school, my coaches there, the Catholic priest and the Lutheran minister, were all on the same team. They said, they didn't have a formal meeting about this, but it was as though they came together and said, we have 18 years with all these kids. We've got a town full of kids, and we've got 18 years to make them good Christians and send them out into the world, and let's do it together. And they linked arms. My younger brother, number 4, is raising his 7 children on the same farm a couple of decades later, and everything's changed for him and his wife. You know, they don't have that same support from the ambient culture, and I think that's one of the sort of touch points which inspired the conversations which led to the publication of these small essays. That as a priest, so many times people have come up to me and said, "We don't know what went wrong. You know, our parents, they took us to church and sent us to Catholic school and got us the sacraments and taught us how to pray, and we kept the faith, and we did the same thing. Our children didn't keep the faith. They're all gone, and our grandchildren aren't even baptized. It breaks their heart, and they carry around a lot of shame." and devastation because of that, not knowing or realizing that, of course, it's not that simple. It's not simply their fault that the culture has shifted under their feet, and old methods don't work.
And there are kind of multiple pressures on
Yes,
families that
absolutely.
are coming from all directions.
Yeah. Archbishop Charles Chaput, you must know
Yeah.
him, who used to be in Denver and then Philadelphia. He came to our campus and he compared North Dakota and the campus of the University of Mary to the Shire.
Right.
And I was very deeply moved, but I remember that at the end, you know that Frodo came back and said, sometimes a place like this needs an invasion of dragons. And so it's not a perfect place that I'm from, but there is something idyllic about it, and there is still some cultural influence of Catholicism, but it's waning quickly.
Yeah. How have you found your visit to the UK? Are you seeing some of the same kinds of things that we're seeing in the States? Same kind of social pressures, same kind of. We always. I mean, a friend of mine once termed London, especially, as the epicenter of the culture of death. And I don't know. I think maybe that's moved to Canada now. But I wonder whether in fact we're seeing things maybe happen here that we always thought the States was going to stay more religious, but even that's kind of waned a bit in the last few years, hasn't it?
Yes, certainly it has. When we talk about the end of Christendom, this is something that St. John Henry Newman predicted long before it happened. He saw that it was coming. And Christendom in Europe probably began to come to an end with the First World War, really. And it lasted quite a bit longer in the United States. But it has been coming to an end in most of the United States. We're in a thoroughly post-Christian ethos. What I've seen here, yes, I've seen elements that are very similar. Most dramatically, I think, so I was at Leeds Trinity, and then I was over in Cork in Ireland, and then I'm here. I'm very edified by the gatherings that I've spoken with because, of course, in the darkness, the light shines all the brighter. And so the encouragement that the small Catholic gatherings that I've been at, the encouragement that the people draw from each other is really spectacular. It makes the work of the Catholic Truth Society and other apostolic organizations all the more important because people need a lifeline. They really are looking for that. But probably the most dramatic example, yesterday morning, so before I gave that public talk at St. James Spanish Place, Father Mark Vickers, my friend from seminary, took me out to Eton and Windsor. And we went to Eton, walking around, it reminds me of the book about Newman and his vision, The Making of Men, to be at Eton, my goodness. The castle, the Windsor Castle looks down on it and all these things. But there were rainbow flags everywhere. Yeah. And big posters at the entrance of the quad explaining all of this as though it's the most important thing possible for the boys at Eton to absorb this rainbow ideology. Very strange in that sense, because even if it weren't fundamentally flawed, how could it be prioritized over everything else? Anyway.
Well, since historically half of our prime ministers have come from that single school,
right.
It's probably extremely important to get them thinking right from the very beginning.
Yes, I suppose it's tactical. Anyway, so yeah, I've seen traces of that, but I'm not at all. People are angry and wringing their hands and losing hope and all that. I have no time for any of those things. I don't think that that's the moment that we're in. We're in a moment in which there are great deeds to be done and great thing. It's a moment to build. It's a moment to consolidate. It's a moment to embrace the true adventure of the gospel. It's very exciting.
A moment for heroes, I think. And
yes,
kind of exciting
and
moment.
Saints. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, so I heard your name a couple of years back. Monsignor Armitage, the former rector of Walsingham, mentioned your book, From Christendom to the Apostolic Age, to me as one of the best kind of syntheses of the current situation of the church and the world. I heard you speak about the kind of genesis of the project as a kind of discussion.
Yeah.
So give me a bit of the background of how the text actually came to be.
Yeah, well, you've heard me say that it's a surprise and a little bit of an embarrassment. There's an objective side of the embarrassment in that, the book from Christendom to Apostolic Mission is just really a very humble essay. It's 90 pages long, and so I'm embarrassed that when people.
Don't be. CTS has been living
Oh yes,
off
yes, yes.
small books.
Oh, that's
for
right. No, that's
150
right.
years.
No. So this is good that you and I are talking because it changes my perspective. Because of course that's right. That is the genius of CTS, in that respect. So I'm glad now. It's not a crisis of literacy, is it?
No.
That's good. So great. So, but I'm still embarrassed that the book took so long to get to come to light, because it was the fruit of a discussion of a group of friends who really love the church, people connected to the University of Mary and outside the university, people that I've met through the years who really love the church, and we're talking about the things that are happening in the culture. And
I mean, did those take place in a kind of formal setting, or really it was
not really
simply those
formal?
sort
No.
of-
It was. I mean, so. We would
Like
get
all the best Catholic discussions over a glass of wine, beginning with "the problem is."
Yeah, that's right. No, yeah, that's right. And not all together either.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, one-offs, two people here, circling back, all of these things. And then I think there was a exigency also involved in it, in that, for instance, in my case, in my office as university president, I'm often asked to comment upon things and give presentations and those kinds of things. So I was giving talks on it and seeing how it was resonating and all of those things. Eventually, that resulted in the first draft of a manuscript, and then the second draft of a manuscript. And that did become more formal. In other words, the manuscript then was circulated around, and people were able to give comment and those kinds of things. And then the manuscript finally came to my desk and sat there for 2-3 years, just gathering dust, because I didn't have the bandwidth to do anything with it. So what happened then is that in May of 2020, after the pandemic had shut our campus down, I did have a little bit of time. We blew the dust off the manuscript, prepared it for publication, and put it out. And then, just as an aside, we put it up on Amazon. And
I think many great books were kind of put together in that period. Things that people had been thinking about
that's
for
right.
a long time.
No, I think that's probably true. It certainly happened for us. So we published it, and I think the first print was 350 copies, something like this, and I sent it out to all my faculty and sort of got it going, and then in September, published it in May, it began to sell a little bit over the summer. In September, we began selling 150 copies every single day out of our bookstore. We were fulfilling the Amazon orders out of our bookstore.
Right,
and then, of course, the bookstore itself sells books directly. 150 copies. And then bishops buying thousands of copies. Bishops sending them out to all of their priests. Or one bishop had a book study in every parish, and they did like a study guide and a podcast series on it and all these things. I was very surprised by this and embarrassed, deeply embarrassed, because we weren't able to keep up.
Right.
With it, and so we were trying to print copies, and it was in the pandemic. There was supply chain issues, no paper in the world. Is that possible? No paper, no washing machines, no dishwashers, no paper. Fine, and so finally we were able to kind of catch our breath and catch up, and I mea culpa, mea maxima culpa, that what evidently has been so needful was released 3-4 years after it should have been, or maybe not. Maybe in the midst of the pandemic was the time in which it was meant to strike a nerve. Look at the cover for a moment. This cover was selected by me and my assistant. We just kind of did Google searches and found a piece. These are the first Christians in Kyiv, and so these are the first Christians who brought the gospel to what's now Ukraine. Now consider that we had no idea that in the midst of that, one of the great conflicts of the world, in the midst of the time of this book, would be in Ukraine, and so it's very providential.
There's a hand of providence all over it.
Yeah.
So I mean, just going to the actual kind of the thesis of the book. I mean, you start with this quotation from the Aparecida document, which was basically put together by Pope Francis when he was Cardinal Bergoglio there
Yeah.
in Buenos Aires. So this document was put together by the Bishops' Conference, the Bishops' Conferences of South America. And he says that we are not living in an era of change, but a change of era. So this is it's a great quote.
Yes.
And it's a great
Yeah, it
quote.
is.
And I was thinking about this, and I mean, is this just the human penchant for imagining that our own times are the most important times there have ever been? Or do you really think there's something, really different about the times that we're living through at the moment?
Yeah. Well, so I think that's an astute and erudite question, because it is true that the dramatic nature of human life is such that we would always think that the crises of our times are unique and irrepeatable and those kinds of things. But no, I think that we are in one of these moments when you can draw a bright line between everything that went before and everything that is coming after. It's a civilizational shift.
So this is not just from the point of view of the church, or is this also just
No. It's the world at large.
Okay.
It's the imaginative vision by which society conducts itself. Now, what I think could be said is that we're not talking about your lifetime or my lifetime. Things have come to a zenith during our lifetimes, but this is a 300-year shift. And so we're talking about a change of the ages in terms of the ages of history. Dawson, Christopher Dawson wrote about the ages of the church. This is one of the great seismic shifts for sure. And it's indisputable that what was once a deeply Christian culture, so all of society in the West, was deeply characterized by the imaginative vision, by the overall narrative of the human drama, by the moral order which comes to us from Christianity. All of that has been set aside. And what's interesting, and this goes to the second book then, what's taken its place is not simply a neutral secularity.
Yeah.
What's taken its place is not paganism. And C.S. Lewis saw this. He was like, we quit talking about people becoming pagans again. Give me a pagan, he said.
Yeah.
This is not what's happening. What's happened is that Christianity has been replaced by a new, very fervent religion, which is parasitic upon Christianity.
Okay. I mean, before we get to that, which we will, I mean, the sort of central thesis in the book From Christendom to Apostolic Mission is if I've understood it correctly, is that we are moving from a context in which the whole of kind of society was, in a sense, set up to help you live a Christian life. Right? And I mean, I think I'd be interested to hear your take on this, because I think often you hear people speak about leaving Christendom behind as a kind of a liberation. Finally, we've got rid of all those the pomp and ceremony and the connection between church and state. It all had to go so that we could be finally free. Yeah. But in your book, you make it quite clear that Christendom had some real advantages and was a time of great beauty, a time of great, the flowering of Christian culture.
Yes.
So, I mean, tell us a bit about what you think was good, what was bad about it, and as we're kind of coming out of it, what the new kind of challenges are. I suppose that's the whole book, really. But
yeah, no, well, it is. It's at least a portion of the book, but I'm happy to say a word.
Yeah.
So yes, a Christian civilization which grew up out of the evangelistic work of the church, the success of the spread of the gospel, was a very beautiful expression, maybe the most beautiful the world had ever seen, of human civilization, because it meant that the truth about who we are was central to government and law and art and architecture and literature. And the flourishing of that was very humane Uh, and Christianity, and one wouldn't have known this at the very beginning when the first apostles were looking up to the sky on the Mount of the Ascension. One wouldn't have known that encoded within the gospel would be a genius for institutions. I think this, by the way, this is superfluous, but this idea of Jesus wandering around, a vagabond, all of this. This isn't the picture of Christ that comes to us from the Gospels at all. He was very orderly and strategic in the way that he dispatched his apostles 2 by 2 with clear instructions. He was building an army. It was not to fight with the weapons of the world, but there's a deep sophistication from an institutional standpoint. And so Christianity then flourishes with these magnificent institutions and structures, the cathedrals, along with orphanages and hospitals and schools, and finally the university. It's an amazing thing. And so Christendom was very, very beautiful. And then think about the great cathedrals. Think about Cologne or Notre Dame, or York Minster, these kinds of places, beautiful, or
Canterbury,
right,
which has had its own
moment
of.
There was a little controversy there recently, or think of the Missa Solemnis, or the soundscape of Europe, classical music. It's all very beautiful. So those are the advantages. There are great disadvantages as well. Christendom is a time in which people can very easily become lukewarm. They can just be going along for the ride. It can be a time of hypocrisy, pretending to care more about God and truth than you really do. It can be a time in which people will prey upon the church for material advantage because the church has influence, and so you can gain wealth or power by being associated with it, which compromises the purity of intention among priests and bishops. And all of those things are disadvantages. And also, there's an illusion. The devil is always on the move, and so the church is never weaker or more fragile or in greater danger than when it appears strong, but it's lost its rootedness in the invisible world. That's a time of great peril for the church. And so those are some disadvantages of Christendom. We live in a new apostolic age, though. The first apostolic age was the first 300 years, the age of the martyrs, and that the church operated according to a particular mode then, with different strategies than during Christendom. During the long time of Christendom, the church operated in a Christendom mode in Christendom, but in mission territory, the church always had that apostolic mode. Everybody knew that you didn't do things the same in Paris as in Papua New Guinea. And then, but then there are advantages and disadvantages to an apostolic age as well. In an apostolic age, because the cost to be a disciple is higher, there's much less hypocrisy. Hypocrisy is the sin of Christendom, not the sin of an apostolic time as much. The contours of the adventure that the gospel presents become clearer, and so the church begins to attract the most high-hearted, those who are seeking the greatest sacrifice, who are very high quality, not simply in their humanity, but in their spirit, which is very beautiful. There's a greater purity among priests and bishops because those who are there for the wrong reasons, because they're looking for power or influence or an easy life.
Won't find it in the church.
Yeah. So they'll find something better to do. Yeah. They'll get smart, and so that's all to the good, I think. And I think also you have the opportunity of suffering for the faith, which has always been seen as a great advantage, as a great opportunity. That you remember at the end of the age of the martyrs, there were people who were disappointed that they couldn't shed their blood as easily, and so they went out to the desert seeking white martyrdom, which was the beginning of the monastic movement with Anthony of the Desert and all those people. There are disadvantages to the times in which we live too, and those would be that error in all of its forms, moral and doctrinal, is very rife. It's all over the place. There's tremendous pressure to make peace with the surrounding culture for material gain. That results in a lot of apostasy. There's cowardice. The sin of Christendom time is hypocrisy. The sin of apostolic time is cowardice, pretending to care less about God and truth than you really do. It's hard to raise children. What we talked about before in an apostolic time, that's a real challenge. And then I think this is an important one as well, and I spoke to the priests and seminarians a little bit about it today. A disadvantage to an apostolic time is that it can become very rigorous. In other words, because the challenge of the culture is so stern, Christians can give into the temptation to circle the wagons, to say, let's keep our flame burning brightly here, but to hell with the world. Let's keep all of the contagion out. Let's protect our children. Let's protect our social arrangements. Let's have nothing to do with the world outside, which is not a Christian understanding at all. The Catholic Truth Society is out there in the way that you are because you agree with Jesus that we have common concerns with the whole of humanity. And so we can never hide in that fashion, becoming rigorous or shrill. We're always called to be gracious and winsome, even in the face of great threat. But that requires courage, and it requires that you truly believe in the end that the whole victory is settled and that we just have to remain faithful. But anyway.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things which I thought was very interesting, you spoke about one of the advantages of working within a kind of Christendom model is that you're speaking to people who essentially understand, the basic premises behind the Christian story, the Christian message, and you just kind of have to wake it up.
Even less than understand.
Yeah.
They've imbibed it. They might not understand it at all. And what the saints of Christendom do is help them to understand it, and they're waking it up. But that's a great advantage. Whereas now, it's a tabula rasa, it's a blank. It's not even a tabula rasa. That's a paganism.
It's worse than that.
It's worse than that. There's an anti-Christian trope which is inscribed upon the tablet and upon the minds and imaginations of people. Who would have thought that? I mean, the early Christians were so effective in their witness because people said, look at how they love each other. Look at their love for the poor and for the sick. And now we're the biggest monsters of all. Can you imagine that? And I'm looking at you. You don't look like a monster. You look like a nice person. And so am I deep down.
Yeah, whereas we've got to a point where the church, the world looks at the church and says, "Oh, look at those, abusers."
Abusers is right,
and all the rest.
That's right, homophobes and fussy old men who just want to get into other people's bedrooms, as though there's no rational basis for what we're trying to say.
Yeah, and so this is where you take up the famous quote from C.S. Lewis, where he had that correspondence with Don Calabria in Italy. There's a fascinating story behind that. That I think Don Calabria didn't speak English and C.S. Lewis didn't speak Italian, so they wrote to each other in Latin. And he takes up that idea that we're going back to talking to pagans, and he says no, we're not going back to talking to pagans. He says the difference between a pagan and an apostate, somebody who's left the faith, is the difference between an unmarried woman and an adulteress. So in a sense, living in a post-Christian world, the apostle has a kind of doubly difficult task because the people he's speaking to almost have been kind of vaccinated against the gospel because they think they know what it is.
Yeah, they think they've heard it and it has nothing to do with them. But that takes us right to the point, and this is the apex or the climax of that small essay, that our fundamental task in the world in which we live right now as disciples of Jesus is to reawaken the imaginative vision within the people all around us, within ourselves first of all, to make sure that we're nourishing our minds and our hearts upon the epic drama of the gospel, and then that we're finding creative and amazing and effective ways to communicate that to people who think that they've heard it but really haven't, and so that they can hear it again for the first time. It's really important. But that happens. I've seen it happen. And when it happens, it's the most beautiful thing because it's as though people are waking up from a nightmare. All of the promises that are made by the contemporary world, by this new religion which has arisen in response to Christianity, it can't keep them. It begins with all of this high-minded, high-sounding promise, throw off oppression. Let's say goodbye to the bad old days, the dark ages, all that we have to lose is our chains. But then it devolves into just boring, super boring materialism, shop till you drop.
Yeah.
And then nobody's satisfied with that. And I was saying to the priest today, I said, on the tube, on the underground ride over to Westminster, I was looking around to see if everybody in London, in this great secular city, is fabulously happy. You know what I mean? With all of the technological progress, we can get in big steel tubes and fly through the air, and we can have our food delivered to us by robots at the front door, and our lives are so comfortable and easy. We should be deliriously excited every day to enter into this wonderful life, and everybody is desperately sad. It's extraordinary.
Yeah.
It reminded me, I had a friend in seminary who had been a Carthusian for a year. He had discerned with the Carthusians. And they're serious business. You know what I mean? They're not sort of slacking. Silence and great asceticism all the time. All that. He was, after he discerned that he was not to remain there. The brothers gave him a bus ticket. He walked down the hill. He got on the bus, and he was struck to his bones with the impression that people were desperately sad. He hadn't seen that before because, of course, that kind of sadness, there's plenty of struggle in the monastery, but that kind of sadness did not suffuse the atmosphere of the Carthusian monastery where he was, but it filled, and he said, I was haunted by it for weeks upon weeks, that the world is desperately sad. And so this is a great advantage to us. People are, on my campus, we're the Shire. It's a happy place. There's lots of wonderful spiritual activity happening all the time, confessions and adoration and masses and wonderful classes. And I hire great, not just faculty who are smart, but good looking. You know what I mean? It's a wonderful place. But we see what everybody's seeing, increasing amounts of mental health issues, depression, anxiety, inability to cope with life. What is that all about? Well, it's because the culture is poison, and Christianity is the antidote, and we want to get it into the hands of as many people as possible. And so our key task is to preach the gospel in a way that people can hear it again. And so that means that we have to lean into the epic arc of it, the profound imaginative force behind the story of the gospel, because we've got it. We have the best story, the most compelling vision of reality that's ever been believed by large numbers of people over large periods of time. And we have the best villains, we have the best heroes, we have the best ending to the great drama. It eclipses everything anybody else has tried. But people don't know that. It's sad.
Yeah, so it's a question of finding new ways to tell that story.
Right.
And it's very interesting the kinds of people who are taking that challenge up.
Yes.
Often not necessarily people even within the church. We've spoken about this on this podcast a few times. That long series on YouTube about the Bible stories by Jordan Peterson, basically. Incredible, people listening for 20 hours about the story of Genesis.
Right.
They're not listening to a bishop or a priest. They're listening to a psychiatrist or a psychologist. So, that brings us on a little bit to the thesis of your second book, which I must say I enjoyed immensely. And frankly, these are moments in which the church is going through its fair share of troubles as well. And I think your chapter in there gave some real hope. We'll come on to that chapter in particular, but so the thesis in that book, I think, is that you're saying that having abandoned Christianity, we don't move into the kind of sunlit uplands of perfect, rational people who know exactly what's going on. But in fact, we've gone into another era of essentially of kind of superstition of a deeply religious people, but who have kind of thrown away a revealed religion and constructed something for themselves which is kind of very hollow. So do you want to just give us a kind of summary of? So the religion of the day is an expression taken from Cardinal Newman. And he was speaking about liberalism. And to a certain extent, that has really, the apotheosis of liberalism is kind of what we're living in a sense. So, you say that, people of today are very religious, but their religion is something else. So what is it?
Well, right. So I could say very much about this, but we wouldn't have time. In the simplest form, I would say this, that the new religion, the religion which replaces Christianity, and which we ourselves need to be attentive to and make sure that we're converted out of and back into Christianity, is a religion which is parasitic upon our faith. In other words, it's something which has haunted Christianity from the beginning, Gnosticism, but a new form, a virulent strain of Gnosticism, which really wouldn't be possible without Christendom having come before it. And the easiest way to articulate it, I think, is to say that it shares the apprehension of Christianity, the insight of Christianity that there's something desperately wrong with the world. But the big difference is what's wrong with the world is adamantly not me.
Okay.
Right, which is the opposite of Chesterton's response to the Times, what's wrong with the world, dear sirs, I am, was his response. Well, the opposite is to say that it's not me, that there's something out there, there's something in the world which needs to be rearranged, which needs to be fixed, which needs to be perfected, and so long as that happens, we can build the grand utopia of the future. And this explains the kind of religious zeal with which people approach the world. And so it's an amazing thing because last night at St. James, Spanish place, someone asked about living in a post-truth age. And I think that, this question of moral relativism, it's interesting. Moral relativism, I think, was of course, it's always been around, going back a long time to Protagoras, but moral relativism in our own time, I think, was a quiver in the bow that was super helpful in breaking apart the moral norms of Christianity. But it's not. I don't think I think it's waning to a certain extent and being replaced by a moral dogmatism which has different foundational values than Christianity. And so the religious fervor, now we're at the point where there are dogmas and excommunications and all of the things, and we did that much better. But of course, it couldn't manifest itself in that way at the beginning because it looked too much like, the Spanish Inquisition, nobody expects, oh, here it comes. And so it looked too much like that. But now that we've been kind of buried a little bit, it can all come back. And so it's a religious fervor which replaces Christianity in a parasitic way, and which is uniquely utopian in its sensibilities.
Yeah, and because it's rejected the basic kind of Christian idea that we're in a fallen world and we ourselves are fallen and need forgiveness. Yeah. Because there's no forgiveness in this new religion. It's just you must be, everything must be perfect.
Exactly. And so we live in a new age in which everything is permitted and nothing is forgiven. And that sounds good until you try and live it, and then you realize it's savage. It's the most merciless and terrible kind of existence. A world in which everything is permitted and nothing is forgiven is not the world we want. But that's what we've got. Because again, the modern world begins with a rejection of the doctrine of the fall, not necessarily with a rejection of God. That comes later.
Yeah, and so in that sense, the church has found itself in a bit of a kind of difficult situation because the good news that we want to proclaim is that we're fallen, but we have a savior. But people don't want to hear that. I'm fallen. How dare you say that?
It's extraordinary. No, this is. So let's be honest. Who knows how many people listen to this podcast? Maybe 10, and so maybe thousands. Who knows? But however many, I'm not embarrassed to say that we should just be honest with each other and just throw out a little bit of public admiration for the formulation of this, which I think is quite demonic. It's extraordinary how the power of the gospel has been fundamentally undermined, because in the long ages of the preaching of the gospel, normally, because the world being so messed up is so apparent to people in their daily lives, in their family relationships, in their governmental expression and everything, the world has been, it's so clear. Chesterton again says that the fall is the only empirically provable part of our religion. So because that's been so clear, when the gospel has been preached overwhelmingly, not always, but overwhelmingly, it's been received as spectacularly good news beyond the shadow of a doubt, and received with deep gratitude. Think of the conversions that happened after the apparitions of Our Lady of Guadalupe, for instance, millions. And what's happened instead is that people have been carefully, by this new religion, immunized from that to think there's nothing wrong with me at all. And in fact, those amazing conversions which happened, they were just sort of variations and forms of colonial oppression. Those people were not free. They were threatened by the sword, all of those things which would be news to many of them, I think, who lived with great fervor and were deeply relieved to meet Jesus and to find that salvation was possible for them, and to make sense of the evil in the world that they were experiencing. So we've constructed a world in which there's nothing that's wrong with any of us inside. And so we don't need to be redeemed. And so we don't know that we're mortally in danger. And so when the gospel is preached, it's not received as good news, but terrible news. There's something wrong with you. And so we have people who are terminally ill and who are refusing treatment as a result. And that's the saddest possible thing. If you're my physician and I'm riddled with cancer, but you can still treat it, to tell me that I'm sick is a great kindness. I'm very grateful to you, and let's get going. Let's fight this. But yeah, it's from a simple strategic standpoint, it's very impressive what's happened.
But no, it's fantastic. I mean, it's fantastically clever. Can only have come from the kind of incredible cleverness of the devil.
Yes.
But it's interesting that in the Gospels it speaks about the Holy Spirit that needs to convince us of sin. And in a sense, that line was always a bit of a kind of mystery, because we think of the Holy Spirit as doing all these other things, but the Holy Spirit has to come and convince us first of our sins before we can then receive the good news.
Sure.
And I think that's very important. I mean, to move on, I think it's chapter 5, which is where you deal with, in a sense, the kind of mechanics of salvation, how it works, and how now the church has to, in a sense, take on that same role that Christ took on. He came, he took upon himself all the sins of the world, every sadness, every mistake, every cruelty, and having taken all that on, gave us the medicine of eternal life, because he himself couldn't be destroyed by all of that. Right. And you say it in the book, and I really found this genuinely, full of hope, and a genuine, like a kind of a really beautiful way of saying, don't lose hope, even when you see all these problems that the world has, in a sense, infiltrating the church, having a big effect on the church. We see all these, these terrible abuses, and we see all the kind of moral decay that the world is undergoing, having its effects on the church and being experienced within the church.
Yeah.
but that the church experiencing it has a mission. So tell us about that. I mean, give us that good news.
Well,
really.
right. So you described very beautifully what happened in the incarnation and in the redemption, that Jesus assumed all of the diseases of humanity and generated the immunity in his blood. The church is meant as the body of Christ to do that in every age, and so in every age, from the very beginning, the church has taken into herself in some of her members every wickedness, every heresy, every scandal, every rebellion, every violence that's possible. A great battle ensues within the body of the church, as would happen if a virus entered your body or my body. A great battle ensues because the church has the divine life. It's unable to be overcome. And in the end, it always comes out triumphant, having generated the immunity in its bloodstream for itself and for the salvation of the world. And we've seen this happen again and again and again. And I think that the source of so much of our anger and anxiety is that we don't know that. We take that utopian addiction, this idea that there's nothing fallen in us, and so we can construct the perfect life ready for Instagram and the perfect society on our own steam without any help from God. Thank you very much. And we overlay that upon the church, such that the church is misunderstood to be some kind of perfect society by progressives or traditionalists, it doesn't matter the sort of prism that you bring to it. The church is supposed to be this perfect society sailing over all the ills of the world, dispensing its medicines, uncontaminated and untrammeled by the vicissitudes of human life. That's not how it's meant to be at all. The church is always fighting a two-front battle, three fronts really, but two fronts that we can talk about in the time constraints that we have. The last front is, of course, the battle of the individual human person against sin. But the first battle is the battle of evangelization, bringing the gospel to an unbelieving world. The second battle is the battle that I've just described, the battle within the church, because the church, the Catholic Church, is at the center of humanity, and it's within the church that the fundamental struggle for humanity happens, because this generation of Catholics is responsible for this generation of people. It's always been so. And so we're fighting all the time, and the antibodies that are generated within the bloodstream of the church are the saints. The saints are the ones, and so when you read the lie, I think the saints would be very astonished. I think they are astonished. I think they're looking down and saying, "What's wrong with you people? Wake up! Why do you think, oh, things are so hard and all this, and we lived in some golden age? Are you crazy? We were tired. Our hands were tired. Our feet were tired. We thought everything was on the verge of total collapse, and yet we were faithful, and so God was faithful too, and He took us through." And so I think in every age this happens, and it's happening in our age. But that shouldn't, it can grieve us when we see evil worm its way into the heart of the church. It can cause us deep pain. It can motivate us to do the good, to pursue holiness for ourselves and for our families and for our communities with deeper zeal and ardor. But if it surprises us, if it angers us, if it discourages us and causes us to lose hope, then we're not paying attention. It's simply crazy that we would think anything else. And so, yeah, that's the insight there. And I will say that really, Americans are addicted to William James and what's the cash value of this idea and all this other stuff. I think that's the idea that has a little bit of cash value. It resonates very much with people.
No, but because it also, it gives an explanation of the sufferings that we're going through. I mean, I think there's no doubt that the church is going through its own crisis at the moment, which seems to be, it just seems to be getting kind of deeper and deeper. Yeah. And in one sense, we would wish it to just kind of be resolved from one day to the next. If we had the perfect bishop, or if we had the perfect pope, he would just give us a solution, and then it would all go away, and the church could go back to being the shining light on the hill. Whereas, in fact, we need to really take on all of those sicknesses, as you said. And when you take on when you get a virus, you can get a fever and it's not pleasant, but your body's fighting it, and then you come out the other end. And I think it's that was a chapter that really gave me a kind of a lot of hope for where we are. I mean, it does require that, and this is, I think, important that you said about the saints, because in a sense, all those moments of crisis in the church have thrown up these beautiful figures who have kind of renewed the church, renewed monasticism, renewed the orders, the lay apostolate. So in one sense, I can't wait to see who's going to be come up, and in a sense, I think every Catholic has to, and I think this is another beauty of these books. You're not selling a one size fits all solution.
No.
Yeah.
No, I have no idea.
But in a sense, you're saying maybe it's you.
Yes, that's
maybe
right.
you have to be the one.
That's right.
Yeah.
No, that's
maybe
right.
I have to be. I don't know. Maybe me and my 7 kids. Maybe we have to kind of start a kind of renewal.
I think that's right. And isn't it exciting to consider that when the history of the church is written in our age, that we'll have known some of these things? It's really an amazing thing. There's a young woman up for canonization in my own diocese who was a focus missionary on my campus. And she died of cancer in 2015, I think. And her cause is open for canonization. Michelle Dupont is her name. But it's an amazing thing to think that during my presidency, a saint passed through, and maybe more than one. Maybe some of my theology professors or Catholic studies professors. You know what I mean? And so it's very exciting to consider that in every age God raises up saints. He's inevitably doing so now, and it's an opportunity for us to meet them and to be them.
Yeah. No, I think that's a wonderful place, I think, to maybe draw the discussion to a close. I mean, thank you very much for your ministry. Thank you very much for these books. I must say, I was saying earlier to you that CTS has been publishing for over 150 years. We've published thousands of books. But I think, when I get to bring these kinds of books to the faithful in the UK especially, this is what we kind of live to do. To tell the story again, to give some real kind of wisdom on how we can look at our lives and essentially encourage people's sanctity. I mean, that's what we're here for.
Well, Pier Paolo, let me say how much I appreciate the work that CTS does. Really, it's amazing. Since I was a young boy, somehow I've known about CTS. I don't know, maybe some of your small publications had drifted in my direction. And then certainly when I was a seminarian in Rome, when I would come to visit London, I'd see them at the entrance of churches, and I just thought, what a country, what a wonderful place that here, in a place that once was deeply hostile to Catholicism in every expression, the Catholic Truth Society is spreading the good word. I just admire you so much. And so when you called wanting to know if it might be possible to distribute these books, I couldn't believe it. I thought I was in a dream.
Thank you so much. And so, the books are available from the CTS website, and I encourage everybody who's interested in the future of the church and the future of Christianity here to have a good look at those, a good study of those books. I think they're really helpful. Thank you, Monsignor, for coming to visit us, and really all the best in your mission at the university there in Dakota.
God bless you. Thank you so much.